Why don't we all just take a minute and think about that time when you first learned that the scales of justice could cut like a knife, and you were either sentenced or you stood in a courtroom and watched a loved one be sentenced. Just take a minute and go back there, will you? That's all right, I'm not saying much anyhow. I'm a criminal defense lawyer, and I represent the doom and gloom component of the program. I never fully comprehend why I'm invited to go anywhere, because I'm deeply pessimistic. My wife and I live on a small farm where our joy is our animals, our children are all gone. And so predictably, several nights ago, I said to my wife, Judy, I'm not going. I went to this thing 2 years ago. They've got good people. I just have nothing to say to these folks. She said, did they put you on the program? Yeah. Did they pay for your flight and your hotel? Yeah, you got to go. So thank you for the invitation, sort of. I only have two things you need to remember about this talk, but I've got about 40 minutes. So when I get to those two things, I'll stop and tell you what they are so that you can write them down. I'll try to make the trip along the way interesting. And so I begin in the 14th century with the words of a Protestant, or not a Protestant, but a protesting minister during the peasant revolt in England. Actually, it was in Germany. When Adam delved and Eve span, who was then the gentleman? Put literally, when they got it on, did it matter between whether it was the upper classes or the lower classes who did it? Now, why do I choose such a graphic line to begin a presentation like this? I've represented people who have been accused of rape, murder, dismembering, and hiding bodies that have never been found, on down to people who have been accused of peeing in public, a crime that I do almost daily when I get home to my farm. And I guess that makes me a sex offender, and fuck you if you think I'm going to register. And while I'm on that topic, is that anonymous little piece of shit who sent me an email warning me about coming in here in the audience? Stand up. Stand up. Excuse my language. I'm told that was the most memorable thing of 2 years ago, and I'm working hard to clean it up. I think that when historians look back at our time, they're going to wonder about what has possessed us, and I'm going to give you my working hypothesis. I think we suffer from what I call sexophrenia. And I've heard reference to it in other contexts. It's a sense of double standards about sex. We use sex to market everything, but then we declare war on the very desire that unites us. Pity the poor man who colors outside the libidinal lines, or whose libidinal compass points anywhere other than true north or the accepted variations. And I think this sexophrenia has the potential to destroy us. I'm always amazed by the energy that is brought to bear in a sex offense trial, the fascination that people have with it. Right now, I'm involved in a couple cases, one in Manhattan, where my client is alleged to be the madam of a high-price escort service catering to billionaires. And when we walk out of the court, it's a literal paparazzi feast. You can't see where you're going because they're tripping over each other, the reporters. Why? Even if the state's allegations are true, and she found some sucker who was willing to pay $50,000 for a weekend with a couple models, I mean, is that news? But yet we gravitate to sex. Sex sells because it defines us. And is there anybody in the room, let's be honest, who doesn't enjoy it? If so, raise your hand. I figured that was the same person who sent me the email about not coming. She took a look at the story of O, and she said, what about the other 25 letters, you know? So what makes us such peculiar animals? Why is it that we revel in something that defines us? And let's face it, we're all circumstantial evidence of sin. If there's a person here who wasn't conceived in a moment of passion, I'd be surprised. What makes us these kind of animals? I've given a lot of thought to it, and I've spent a lot of time actually studying the behavior of starlings. And you invited me here, so you got to. I noticed that I didn't get the full hour and 15 minutes that some of the others did, and I thought, well, they knew what I was going to say. But take a look. This is one of the. Take notes if you have time on your hands. Go on YouTube sometime and look at the Otmoor, O-T-M-O-O-R starlings. The Otmoor starlings. Otmoor is a town in England. Starlings are birds. They flock together in the evening, and there can be hundreds of thousands of them together as a group, performing elaborate maneuvers, and they all seem to communicate instantaneously with one another to turn and pirouette on a dime, creating beautiful, fluid movements. I sometimes think if we were able to get far enough from the earth and look at humankind, we might see the same sort of what appears to be coordinated movements among ourselves, although I wonder. But starlings teach me a lot. They teach me that there's something, in fact, irrational about the herd, about the group. And I think the defense of sex offense cases shows me that irrationality always, because my clients are typically hated. I remember when you all invited me to go to that basement, and it felt like a basement, maybe a bomb shelter in that church in Washington. It was the first time I'd come and had the opportunity to speak to a friendly group of people about my clients. Normally you're in court and everybody's counsel, you can speak now. Judge, no man is the sum of his worst moments. Yes, he made a libidinal error, but should it define him for the rest of his life? How many years is enough to say I'm sorry? 10! I mean, come on. Amy, I loved your presentation, but I get asked from time to time in Connecticut, where I'm from, to go talk to the legislature. I always turn it down because here's what I tell them: go fuck yourselves. I mean, until you've tasted the product, don't try to sell it to me. You want another mandatory minimum? Go do 6 months before you run for office and tell me if that 6 months was enough for just about anything. Do you know that we have, a friend of mine was killed not long ago. How did he become a friend? Well, arguably he was in the wrong place at the wrong time, and perhaps he helped kill a rival drug lord. And so the federal government wanted to kill him. That's justice, right? So we go through this elaborate thing, and the government doesn't get the death penalty, but the judge is really pissed at him, It'll be life. Life again, consecutive to the first. So she gives him 6 consecutive life sentences and a 60-year sentence. And about 3 life sentences into that, we've gotten to know one another pretty well. There's nothing about the government wants to kill you. I'm here to help. That doesn't make for a good relationship. So I turned to him and I said, just smile at her now. Show some pride. He says, smile about what? I said, well, think of the bright side. The first couple times they kill you, they've got to revive you or it's an illegal sentence. So we're in the courtroom laughing, and the judge says, counsel, Mr. So-and-so, that'll be enough. I said, Judge, it isn't anywhere near enough. Keep talking. And unfortunately, Mr. Perez was killed by a rival gang member who caught up with him, proving that you can't outrun some crimes not long ago. And so I'm reminded always in this trade of the high stakes. And I stand before you humbled. And that I'm a little avoidant of some of you because you seem to think you know who I am, and you're so happy to have me here, and you want to tell me your stories, and I might represent something like hope for you. I'm just a tourist. I'm not even a public defender who can claim good motives here. I work for a fee. And if you don't think that doesn't produce a sense of ambivalence in the soul of a lawyer with a conscience, you're wrong. Because if you call me, I'll give you my best efforts if you can afford me. And if you can't, I turn my shoulder to you and leave you to yourselves. That doesn't make me a good man. So I don't want you to be under any illusions about that. But back to these starlings. What is justice? I had breakfast with a few people today, and they said, oh, well, what about justice? I said, yeah, I didn't say it, but I thought to myself, this is what I would have said to my breakfast companion. Negotiate. You don't want to compromise until you have to, but always negotiate. And I'm looking to keep my people off the registry. I've sent people to prison on flat sentences to avoid the registry because I view the registry as more harmful than incarceration, frankly, in terms of the collateral consequences. And then what's worse, I had 2 cases. How am I doing on time? Good. I usually have these little things. If I go to, I've argued in the Supreme Court, a number of appellate courts around the country, and my Supreme and appellate courts, and they always have these little lights, and so I've become very dependent on them. The yellow light means wrap it up. The red light means you've got 1 second to find a graceful way out. I don't know where I am right now. Keep green. I'm green. That's good. One of the oddest things that ever happened to me was this guy and his father came in to see me once, and they described a court proceeding, and I said, I don't know what you're talking about. I said this to him. I said, you both look pretty smart, and you don't seem like you're drunk or stoned, are you? Well, I'm going to have to order the transcript. So I ordered the transcript, and come to find out, they reported accurately what happened. It's just, I don't know what happened. It was really not a proceeding contemplated by law. I don't know what the judge did. The young man had tried to modify his sentence. Here's what happened. He was he was a male nanny charged with fondling a couple 9-year-old girls in his care. He said he didn't do it. He had a very good lawyer. They went to jury selection, and during the course of jury selection, the state, through its case, basically said, look, we're going to come off the felony. You can plead to a misdemeanor. On the record, no sex offender registration, no treatment as a sex offender on probation. In my way of thinking, that's a win. I would have taken that to the bank. This young man is now doing 18 years in Supermax in Connecticut, and here's how that happened. He'd come to me because, in spite of the specifics of that plea deal, the court had imposed on him the requirement to register. And then what's more, and then when he didn't register, the state violated his probation, and then they found that they wanted to impose sex offender registration conditions on him. Well, you know, one thing I learned in law school is all that a contract is a promise that the law will enforce. That's all it is. You promise to kill me for $10,000 and your neighbor Welsh is on the deal. The law ain't going to enforce that. It's an illegal contract. Oh, good idea though it may be. So I go to court thinking, wow, I've got justice on my side. Come along, justice. Let's go into court and put you on display. Judge, you even supervised this plea deal. If my client can't rely upon your word, an oracle of justice, on whose words can he rely? Very interesting argument. Mr. Pattis, the Supreme Court has spoken. Bam. So the kid has to do this stuff. Well, I take the case up to the state Supreme Court and I ask for specific performance of the deal that we struck. And the court said no. He doesn't have to do that. The court was within its discretion doing this because of a change in state law. And the client was so outraged by the Supreme Court ruling that, among other things, he threatened to kill me. Thus effectively ending the attorney-client relationship. And I had, for my family's safety, report him to the police, which was I was deeply ambivalent about him. In a criminal defense lawyer's life, there are any number of death threats, and the usual response to them is, yeah, fuck you. People are going to do it. They don't tell me about it. But when they call, the kid's mom calls my house on a Sunday morning, that was a little bit unusual. So we took it seriously. But he ended up running afoul of the law in many other areas. But it all stemmed from his irrational anger. We'd broken a contract with him. We told him he had a deal. He took the deal. And then the court said, no, you're expendable because you're a sex offender, because you touched a little girl in her private part, even though it was just a misdemeanor, and we'll never forgive you. And I don't think that the treatment of this young man, whose name is Robert Pentland, is forgivable in any sense, and I will go to my grave bitter about it. Here are the two things I want you to remember. Here are the two takeaway moments. I have another confession to make. I didn't read the instructions on what I was supposed to talk to here, okay? I'm a member of the Native American tribe, the Sosumis, The dark side of being a lawyer is that I don't play well with others. I don't join groups. I'm typically not invited back, so rethink that, geniuses, to a place that I've been before. And if you want my attention, you know who my agent for service is. That's usually my modus operandi. But here, when I listened to some of the presentations yesterday, I thought, wow, this is pretty interesting. So that's what we're doing here. And then I looked at the assignment last night, and so I'm supposed to talk about the registry. Sorry about that. I want two things from your advocacy efforts. I'm not fit to take to the legislature. I'm not fit for much public consumption. I think I'm good enough to represent you or your loved one in a war. That's all I know. And here are the tools I need to battle more effectively. One, anytime you see in a statute or a regulation a mandatory directive, whether it be a mandatory minimum or the word shall, replace it with may or a rebuttable presumption. And I'll tell you what that means in a minute. But in other words, what I want you to do is advocate for judicial discretion. Second, I want meaningful oversight, or at least meaningful opportunities to be heard on the scope of probation supervision of offenders. As to rebuttable presumptions and mandatory minimums, several days ago, maybe a week and a half now, I stood next to a man almost identically situated in age to me, meaning the same age, I'm a lawyer, while his family wept and begged the judge for something less than 5 years imprisonment for possession of child pornography. It was a federal offense. It was a 5-year mandatory minimum. We'd had the man evaluated. The evaluation was superlative. Our evaluator said he was one of the best candidates for non-recidivism that they'd ever seen. And the judge apologized to the man and said he was sorry, but the law gave him no choice. 5 years. The good news is the guidelines called for 10. I mean, given the situations in the case, but that was a 60-month miscarriage of justice that the judge was required to perform in your name, fellow starlings. Where was the flock when justice was written in those books? So, shall is a term of art for lawyers. It means must. It means you have no discretion. You can't do it. When you replace shall with may, a judge can make an individualized assessment of risk. I get passionate about my clients, and I never can believe that a jury will say no to me. When it happens, I'm always stunned and bitter. I always shake hands with my adversary before the verdict comes in, and I say, if I win, I'm unbearable. And if I lose, I'm unbearable. So let's just be nice now, and I'll catch you on the next one, and then I'm out of the courtroom. Meaningful oversight in the therapeutic, sociologists talk about the therapeutic state. I'm not a fan of the state. I taught philosophy as a first profession in a college in New York, and realized that it wasn't for me. Even though now I think June, July, August, and the Christmas break, there were 4 good reasons that I wish I could return to college teaching, but it ain't happening. I'm lost now. So I have a deep-seated suspicion of the state. I don't think, I once had a prosecutor throw me out of her office after throwing something at me. It was a sex case, as it would turn out. My client was accused of raping his live-in girlfriend. We had reason to believe that she was a psychiatric whack job who wanted to stay attached to him and would say just about anything, just as long as she could make his life miserable. And so we investigated that defense and pressed it hard. Trial was enormously risky, as they always are. We were offered a pretty good plea, 3 years. The guy was looking at 20-some if he lost. I wanted 2.5, and the client, well, more to the point, the client wanted 2.5. So she wouldn't give it to me. So I said to her, I want to talk to your client. I don't represent the victim. I said, I didn't call your victim the client. You represent the state of Connecticut. I would like to talk to your client. You're being unreasonable. When I'm unreasonable, you can say, go talk to my client, and I get some direction. I want to speak to yours, face to face, right now. You can't do that. I said, yeah, that's my point, because the state is a necessary legal fiction. You represent it. You have the power to decide what you think is right without consulting with anybody. I've got to consult with somebody whose pulse I can feel. Don't you think that's a little unfair? And don't you think that when we have a disagreement this fundamental, perhaps you should consult one of your superiors, because perhaps your personal predilections are being misunderstood? Perhaps you're trying to do what you think justice requires without consulting someone other than yourself, and don't you think that's a little too inconvenient in this world, this republic of ours? We took the 3 years. But the state is a legal fiction. You'll never meet it, but its impact is everywhere, and its impact is through its agents. And in our time, the therapeutic state represents, in my view, the gravest threat to liberty. And I know we have psychologists in the office, in the audience. I don't say that directed to you necessarily, but I mean, I see in the family courts, for example, legions of therapists who have arguments about what's in the best interest of the child. We can't even get those cases to a jury, and the experts don't agree, and they're making a fortune with one therapeutic model after another, and the results are the same. The courts are still clogged with the same miserable people screaming at one another. Why is it that in the case of sex offenders, we think we're going to do much better? And if we're going to give therapists and social workers the opportunity and the right to impose liberty-defining conditions on people, shouldn't we have meaningful judicial oversight? I have been to court 4 times on behalf of one man who wants to go do business in Canada, but probation won't let him go. And so we keep asking for hearings, and the judge says he's going to defer to probation. And I keep saying, why? Let's put one of these people on the stand and see if they know what they're talking about. Oh, Mr. Pattis, we can't do that. The court's business would come to a screeching halt. Well, I got news for you. I don't give a shit about the court's business. My client's life has come to a screeching halt. And it seems to me that when you're entering these pleas and your eye is on the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, prison, felony, registration, treatment, the least of your worries is treatment. You just want to get the sentencing over with and get back home to your family. But then your first day on probation, you suddenly learn that the bars around you now are more powerful than the ones that encompassed you when you were in your cell. Why? So I encourage you to chip away at that. You're going to lose, and lose big, but I need the tool because I can't get in front of judges often enough to challenge the reasonableness of conditions. How am I doing on time? Okay, well, somebody was going to give me a flash when I had 5 minutes, so I don't know, he's gone.
We have a hook.
I thought I left my wife at home. You know, I say I cast scorn on the therapeutic state in the model that we use for supervising probationers, but yet I note with some optimism recent developments in isolated decisions. Jack Weinstein in the Eastern District of New York just recently wrote a 400-plus page decision declaring mandatory minimums for juveniles in a child pornography case cruel and unusual because of advances in neuropsychology. I don't know how many of you believe what I believe, but I believe the next great paradigm shift in the development of our thinking on things will be bridging the gap between minds and bodies. We can't do it now. We can't conceptualize the mechanism that we are, but yet we understand the mechanisms that underlie our behavior with greater specificity each year. And as we do, the law nonetheless clings to Victorian models of voluntarism, holding us accountable for things we may or may not be accountable for. So I think the Weinstein model is extremely, or the Weinstein case is extremely useful and offers some hope, as does the recent United States Supreme Court decision about the execution of juveniles. We now know that judgment isn't something that exists on a logician's chalkboard, but rather is infected and affected by what we are. In terms of future legislative changes and opportunities for change, I'm very heartened by the Ohio Supreme Court's decision, together with that in several other states, I believe Louisiana, I think Illinois, that holds that registration is punishment in violation of the ex post facto clause. People keep saying, how can we get these issues into court? How can we litigate? How can we get to the Supreme Court? I mean, one answer is to watch these decisions. The Supreme Court often refers to activity in the states as the laboratory of democracy. Sometimes, you know, they look for developments there. I would say that as these cases arise in the ex post facto context, holding that registration is punitive, there will come a time when it can be revisited on Eighth Amendment grounds. I don't think that time is yet come, and I won't know it when I see it. I'll read about it because some lawyer far smarter than me will take the case. But there is hope in that direction, and if you think your efforts as individuals on the statewide level don't matter, you're dead wrong. You're going to have to force change nationally by forcing change locally. And it's long work. You know, the German sociologist Max Weber once talked about politics as the slow boring of hard boards. We will probably all be dead before the changes we want are enacted. But each of us in our own small ways will make one small step each day in hope, in the quotations that Amy left us with, in particular, the Goodman quote. So I guess it's time to end. I don't have any answers. You don't want to ask questions. You know, I mean, I'm trying to end on some sort of inspiring note. And, you know, I have a lot of young kids that come to work for me. I've had maybe 40 or 50 lawyers pass through my firm. They come, they think, oh, it's going to be so much fun to tell people off in a courtroom and be on the news. And then they start, after about a year, to cry and whatnot. And I'm always picking them up off the floor and telling them, the fight is all there is. That's all we've got. All we've got is the fight. And I'm reminded, I mean, my border collies' names are Odysseus and Penelope, names deliberately chosen because Odysseus is endlessly faithful to me, and Penny is a girl of many wiles who has her heart woven around her paws. And they are so loyal to me. We need to be that loyal to our cause. We need to be that loyal to our loved ones. I'm always moved. You know, it's not my clients who come to me looking for change, it's their parents, it's their wives. My clients are usually so devastated and destroyed, I lose track of them, but their families stay in touch. And I suspect there are more family members here than people who are quote unquote offenders. So remember that the fight is all there is. No one is the sum of our worst moments, not one of us. There are more sex offenders sitting in robes and in legislative chambers than we'll ever know. And in fact, I think we're all sex offenders because, as was said in the 14th century, when Adam delved in Eve's span, who was then the gentleman? I'm no gentleman. I'm not going to go silently into the night. If your brother, your loved one, your son, you come to me as a client, I will promise you the fight a border collie would give. In the end, I'll probably lose it, depending on the facts and the evidence. But the fight is all we have. So if there are questions, on that cheerful note, yeah.
Thank you very much. It's 50 years in the future. You
No, I haven't. Fuck you. Next question.
Well, in this scenario,
Oh, a hypothetical. All right, all right. Oh man, you're a dreamer, aren't you? Send me to hell with Satan. If you ever read Paradise Lost, who's the most admirable person in English literature? Satan in Paradise Lost. But anyhow, I made it. God was asleep that day. Thank you.
God made you the historian, and you're now looking back at this time era of sex offender laws and all that went wrong. What are you going to put in your thesis to God to explain this awful period of time?
Human culture is a mystery, and the ideals that unite people for many decades, many millennia, were taken at face value. When we began to understand them as symbols, we couldn't take responsibility for having to live fully responsible for each of our own actions. So individuals, each in their own way, sought to displace their fear of evil onto convenient scapegoats. It was Jews at one point. It was drug dealers at other points. It was sex offenders at another point. And the society ravaged itself in the end and had to start anew because no one was left standing. I like early medieval history for a reason.
What are your thoughts about if a person is accused of a sexual offense, making it mandatory to not only investigate the charges, but to investigate both accused and accuser?
Well, in theory, that's supposed to happen now. The state has an interest in doing justice. I don't believe in double standards in the law. I don't think we should have boutique rules of evidence. So, for example, I'm not a fan of rape shield laws. I do think that there should be robust discovery of psychiatric records for any witness to vindicate rights under the Confrontation Clause of the Sixth Amendment. I'm amazed. I practice primarily in New England, which is a region that does not permit much discovery in a criminal case. So there are states like Florida where you can do a deposition of witnesses. You can't depose witnesses as a matter of right in a criminal case. Why, I wonder, when Allstate is lying to a jury and defending some guy claiming that it's going to be his money for the car wreck, do they get to depose every blade on the grass to prove the frickin' law is green, and I can't ask a witness a question under oath until I meet her or him at trial? So I think we should have broader discovery. Well, it typically involves a little kid who's being used as a sex object. Next question. No, I mean, what do you mean? I don't, what?
Well, what we discussed earlier today.
I forgot. Oh, okay. We had breakfast this morning. How many of you are trying it in English now. How many of you are, whining is my first language. How many of you are aware of John Ashcroft's new career? Raise your hand if you are. John Ashcroft, former Attorney General of the United States. If you are now charged with child pornography and the child that is the image who's captured in the data is recognizable to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, NCMEC, you can expect a letter from a firm in Houston that John Ashcroft has joined seeking money damages for your victimization of the child. I believe, and I didn't double check this before I got up here, I believe that damages are presumed $150,000. And so the letter will invite you to negotiate away a judgment in excess of $150,000.
Actually, $150K per image.
Is that right? Okay, okay.
We actually got a restitution judgment close to $3.75 million against one guy.
Did he have the capacity to pay?
No, he didn't have the capacity to pay. He was indigent and had the public defender
Wow, wow.
for his defense.
By the way, I've heard this guy talk a couple times today. Those of you with questions about the law should see him afterwards and not me, because he actually is getting it done in federal court. I'm not right now. I'll have more to say about that in a minute. Any other questions? Thank you.